I'm going to pass back over to Patrick now, who's going to talk about transitions.
So you've got a situation with dyslexic underachieving academically, and how do you get someone who's an E grader to get to an A grade? Transitions are complicated and they're sort of sensitive situations. What you need is a number of different components to create a transition. Typically speaking, a student can make a transition by themselves. Usually better having a parent or a tutor or someone who's got some sort of experience to do some sort of academic intervention. What I mean by that is an academic plan, and the plan would basically be a step-by-step process on taking them where they are at that moment in time to a higher level academically.
Patrick, can I just jump in?
Sure.
Could you just explain to me exactly what transitions are?
A transition is when someone goes from a very low level of academic achievement to a high level. So a transition, for example, someone's got 6 months to go before their exams, or it could be a month to go, and they go from a low academic grade to actually having a good eventual exam grade.
Yeah, got you. Thanks.
So there's a number of different things that you have to remember in terms of a transition. A lot of the time in a transition, you don't have complete agreement by the student, and what I mean by that is that students will often wriggle. The reason, because of the conflict and the conflict, as we discussed in the first part of the tutorial, exists, students actually will subconsciously avoid work because it's quite a painful area for them, and therefore getting a student to commit to some sort of academic plan, they might commit to it but evade it, or they might deliberately not commit to it because it's actually a difficult area, bringing up the topic of them doing more work. So first of all, it's a political issue. It's getting the student to commit to the plan, and sometimes when they don't, it's being ready for that and having some sort of being ready for the student to actually wriggle out the plan. What I would suggest is that that parent or tutor must be incredibly gentle with the student, but at the same time they have to be incredibly firm. There's one key point in a transition with every student, and that doesn't come at the beginning, but there's a turning point. Like a lot of different things, there'll always be a turning point, and whilst it's not really visible to everyone else, I've seen what the turning point is. Typically speaking, what the parent or student will do will be to work through with the student on knowledge, on studying, on exam technique, and they'll go through exam technique, and the parent or the student must be ready for this turning point and actually engineer this turning point. Once the dyslexic student has gone, say, 1, 2, 3 weeks into the transition, you could do it immediately. I usually do it after a couple of weeks. Then you work on this basis. You start off with about a quarter of an exam, and you get a student to do a quarter of an exam in the session. Dyslexics, especially if they're underachieving, will be poor in technique. They'll have problems in application of information and so on. If they make mistakes, you trash them and you be highly critical, and then you ask them to do the whole thing again. And I think repetition is a key aspect in terms of training a dyslexic. Of course, the dyslexic might become irritable, that you're being pedantic and officious with them, but you keep on asking them to do it again. So we could be working with a technique called talk to write, which means we could move quite quickly. The point is that you keep on asking them to do it again and again. They go, oh, I don't want to do this again. We've already done it. It's, no, you haven't got full marks. I want you to keep on doing it. You deliver it in a flat tone. No, you haven't defined it. You only got 2 marks out of 6 because you didn't define, you didn't evaluate, you didn't refer to the diagram. Okay, please do it again. and then they do it again, and you say, okay, well, you still didn't, it's not an adequate definition. I'd like you to do it again. And the student at this point is going, oh, this is ridiculous. This is this is completely unfair. I don't know why we're doing this. It's, let's just move on. And you keep on doing it until they get the exam absolutely perfect. You get them to do an A grade exam, and then at that point, they're slightly indignant. Why are we doing this? Let's just move on, because they feel, they feel affronted by this type of criticism. And then once you got it perfect, you ask them about their answers. You ask them about, okay, well, how do you answer this? And they give their perfect answer again. And you said, well, why did you put that button? And you said, well, because you need to define it in a question. And you say, oh, right, okay, so why did you put that part in the end? They said, well, because you needed to evaluate. So, well, why are you talking about the diagram? Well, you're going to lose 1 mark unless you actually refer to the diagram. So, why are you putting the dates? Well, you need to put the dates. And so all of a sudden you turn it on its head, and they're explaining exam technique to you. Even if they can't even explain to you what exam technique is, you just say, why do you do this? Why do you do that? That's what exam technique. And then you say, well, what's difficult about this question? That you got 6 marks for that. They go, well, I don't know, not really much. It's obvious you need to define, evaluate, and you need to refer to the diagram. And then you say, well, what would happen if you work like this process for all exams? And then what happens is like a small glint of light appears, in the sense that they see what the process is. They also hopefully will understand that it's it's going to be different for different questions and stuff like that. But they see they've gone through the entire process, and whilst they haven't got there completely, they've done the process of 1, learning the knowledge, 2, learning how to apply the knowledge, 3, getting criticism of how they've applied that knowledge, 4, trying to apply it again, 5, 6, applying it again, getting feedback, applying it again until they've done it perfect. And whilst they haven't done 1% of what they need to do, they now understand it, because what a dyslexic feels typically is that they're on a road to nowhere, in the sense that they can work all day as hard as they can, but they won't actually get anywhere. But however, if you show them the whole process of learning the knowledge and then applying the knowledge in exam type situation, getting feedback, then they say, okay, I see it, and I can see a glint of light. And as a result, you've got a situation, you've got a turning point, and at that point, the horizons on, for dyslexics slightly start to broaden, and at that point they will become very perceptive. And you don't say this. You don't say, oh wow, a horizon is appearing for you. You say, okay, what would happen if you did this type? You keep on firing questions. What would happen if you did this type of work regularly? They go, well, I suppose I would improve in exams. Would you like criticisms? They go, no. It's like, oh right, so you prefer not to hear criticisms? It's like, well, I suppose they're kind of important. Why are they important? Well, because you won't improve. He said, oh, okay, that's interesting. So would you rather hear criticisms or not? And you grill them on, not only you're grilling them on the exam technique, but you're grilling them on this psychology, which has, shaped them for so many years. You say, why are these criticisms important? What would happen if you did all this in a coordinated plan? That question, you're kind of saying, well, what would happen if you did this regularly? And then you might go, oh, maybe I would improve a lot in exams. And, you can see, we're on a turning point. Would this be difficult? And they go, they will say, no, it would be easy. They said, no, I think it would be very difficult. I think, every single step, and that's one of the things you have to do, encourage a dyslexic, that's going to be difficult every step of the way. You ask them, how do they improve in exams? And they say, well, by learning it and then learning to apply it and then having someone criticize it. And, why is this feedback important? Why is criticism important? They say, well, because you can't, because you won't be able to improve your exam technique. You keep on asking them why for absolutely everything. And then you do this throughout. You don't give it just, a lot of the time people think that giving how should I communicate to my dyslexic who's failing in academics? Come on, I know, just a bit of hard work. That's like water off a duck's back in terms of dyslexia. In terms of what you actually would want to achieve, is ask them the question: why is criticism important? Why is exam technique important? What would happen if you created a plan? What would happen if you started focusing on the way you learn, etc.? These are the questions, and this is what you want to start communicating to a dyslexic. So, James, did you have any questions about that?
Yeah, a couple. I think I understand, but perhaps you could, for everyone else and for me, explain exactly what that process is achieving. What's the purpose of it?
Well, what that process is achieving is there's a number of different things happening. First of all, it's giving them a understanding. Say, like, you have to build a house and you feel slightly overwhelmed by it. What that is doing is giving them a step-by-step example of how to build one brick with a bit of concrete on top of it, and a bit of cement. It's just giving them a small example of exactly what they have to do. And once they have that small example, from going from the very, very beginning, which is not knowing anything, to learning that knowledge, to actually applying that knowledge, and then applying exam technique, then they see that's all there is to it. So it's giving you an example of that's all. You don't have to do. It's not a simple process, but it's not an overly complicated process in the sense that they just need to learn knowledge, learn how to apply the knowledge, get feedback, and practice answering good answers, and that's it. That's all people have to do for exams.
So you're showing people how to answer perfectly and go from an E to an A. And how do you carry that momentum through then? Once you've shown the parent and the student that glimmer of light, what's the next step then?
Well, like the parent, sometimes when you work with dyslexic, then the parent like chirps in with sort of encouragement. See, I told you could do it, and the encouragement, and then the dyslexic is kind of switching off at that point, because if you encourage them, they're going to switch off. But if you say, why should you do this? Why should you focus on exam technique? Why criticism good? So you're changing their approach. How do you go from that point on? You need a rigorous academic plan. I mean, it depends on the amount of time that you've got. You might have a week before your exams, you might have 6 months. So it depends on the situation, but you need a transition plan whereby that they are learning the knowledge, that they're practicing exam technique. Ideally they'd be practicing the exam technique with a tutor. If you're not doing it with a tutor, get a book which gives a forensic breakdown of exam technique, example answers of poor answers as well as good answers, you trying answers, you getting feedback, etc. The way you do it is by creating an academic plan, and this is one of the things we do. So if you're interested in seeing examples of academic plans, talk to us at the Tutor Crowd with the right components, and also working in an effective way. So with the dyslexic, you'll be doing the talk to right methodology and lots of other methodologies.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. On this slide, you talk about taking a forensic approach to what the student was doing and what they now need to do. Could you go into that a little bit, please?
Well, I mean, there's the sort of, for me, there's the triangle of knowledge, exam technique, and learning effectively, and you need to look at all three different things. They need to know the subject, and I think you need to have an understanding of what textbook you need to study. You need to look at your syllabus, but also you need to learn how to apply that information. What we're talking about earlier, of you having good knowledge, but you're applying it in a way that's not going to achieve, and so you need someone to feedback and say, okay, you need to do this in the future. And also you need to learn how to learn effectively, and what I mean by that is by how to memorize, how to replicate information, and so on. If you don't know how to memorize, it's very, very difficult to acquire this information.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. And you've touched on it throughout the presentation, but you've talked about encouragement, and that parents try and encourage, and students will very often switch off when they get encouraged, particularly when they've consistently not been able to perform. Perhaps you can explain to me exactly why encouragement doesn't work anymore.
Well, encouragement works in some cases. A lot of the time it doesn't. The reason being is because a kid has become so sort of ingrained with being, kids actually, the reason why, they can, I a lot of the time I've heard examples of a parent, just really worrying about the kid, because the kid, as soon as you bring up work, would be explosive. You'd have huge rows, and that I've heard lots of the time. The reason being is because they're so critical of themselves, and they're so down on it that they realise that encouragement doesn't mean anything. It's just a meaningless thing, and they don't actually believe that encouragement. And they're kind of, in a way, they're right, because unless they change their learning approach, they're probably not going to achieve academically, unless they start using different methodology, unless they start using a different type of psychology, a different approach to exam technique, using taught to write, using different ways of paraphrasing information, using different ways of memorizing. They're probably not going to, and they can kind of feel that intuitively. And so what you do is you give them methodology, and you say, okay, what's this methodology? Why does it work? You give them a plan. You say, why is this plan important? And that way, when I'm asking them the questions, it's not that I really would like them actually to know the answer. I'm asking them the questions so they can learn it themselves, because I know a dyslexic will memorize something by saying it, by making that type of action. If you say something, then you're going to learn something. So if I wanted a dyslexic to memorize or to understand and memorize what a plan is important, I say, okay, this is a plan. What would happen with a plan? What would happen without a plan? Why a plan's important? What's likely to happen if we had no sort of academic plan? What's likely to happen if we did have an academic plan? What's likely to happen if we had an academic plan and someone managing it and someone not managing it, and so on? They can answer the questions, even if you haven't spoken about it before. A lot of the time I don't explain, I ask questions, and then it's like sort of slightly guiding an airplane. You push them a bit to the left or a bit to the right or something like that.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So just to sum up the webinar, and I suppose all four of the webinars, in fact, what are your key points to bear in mind for a dyslexic to make a transition going from an E grade student to an A grade student? And I'll bring Stephen in a minute, but Patrick, perhaps you want to go first.
Without an academic plan, it's going to be very, very difficult. You need a plan. These plans are going to change all the time, but you need a plan. You also need the right components of the plan. If for some reason there's a complete, our website, has a focus on it, and there are other websites that have a focus on, learning effectively, but a lot of the time there's no focus on how to learn. So it has to have the right components in terms of how to learn effectively. It has to have exam technique. Exam technique has to have you trying and then someone feeding back and then you trying it again. I've worked with a lot of different things in exam technique. That's the only thing that seems to work time and time again. Also, you need a plan of knowledge. Also, you need someone managing it. The way a plan is executed is absolutely critical, and that's what we need to focus on. So it boils down to one thing, which is a plan. Also, within the plan, then there needs to be a slight sort of challenge on the student's psychology in terms of criticism, in terms of mistakes and stuff like that, because you can understand why they're very critical of themselves and they actually become into this negative cycle. But within that, the person who's managing the plan must have some sort of understanding on how to break it, not in an encouraging way, in a very flat, unemotional way. Because when they find it, a lot of the time when they're encouraged, they're like, oh God, they're just trying to appease me because they can see I'm upset, but in fact there is no hope. So it must be a very flat delivery in terms of why is the plan important, and also you have to be ready to manage. Whoever's doing it, the student can manage their own plan. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. Ideally, it would be done by a tutor or a parent.
Thanks, Patrick. Stephen, can I bring you in and ask you a similar sort of question? What are your, just to sum up the webinars, what are your key pieces of advice?
I'm going to directly speak to the dyslexic to answer this question. It's a very interesting question, and looking back at myself while I was a student and now, I would say there are 3 areas I would concentrate on being as a dyslexic. 1, don't give up. The worst thing you can do as a dyslexic is just give up. You need to keep on learning, because learning is a part of your life and it will be for the rest of your life. I know it's stressful, but keep on going. You're going to have good days and bad days with dyslexia. Secondly, learn about yourself. Dyslexia isn't just about reading and writing, okay? It's about yourself. You need to learn your strengths and use your strengths to be able to learn and to do everything in life. Thirdly, it's important to learn study skills which you can use when you're studying. I know it sounds stupid, that comment, but you as a dyslexic know what works and what doesn't work for you. So try to use what you're good at, the techniques that you know that, oh, that's an easy technique, I can do that. Where there's no point, if you have to do things which struggle, but if you can do stuff which is easy, you might as well do that because it comes natural to you. Having dyslexia is best to do things which comes natural, because that means you're using your dyslexia way of thinking, and that's the big thing I believe in, is dyslexia not as a disability but as a way of thinking.
Great,
is that okay, guys?
No, absolutely.
That answer?
I would completely agree with Stephen. I think you've got to keep the faith, and even if it never works out academically, keep the faith and keep trying. There's no crime in in failure, and in fact, if you try incredibly hard in academic and it still doesn't work out, it's far better than you do that than you have never even tried, because it will be the case that something works out for you. If you try incredibly hard and fail academically, you come out a strong person. If you give up and fail academically, you're not as strong. There's something that that failure would actually teach you a great deal of about. There's something that failure will in a strange way very much help the dyslexia and very much strengthen. Stephen Maygrave failed academically, became one of the most successful Olympians the world's ever had. So failure is important. Failure is in a strange way more important than success, and it's not academic achievement is definitely not the most important thing in the world.
Great, thanks guys. That was a really interesting end to the webinar series. And we're now going to move into the questions and answers session. So there's lots of questions coming in already.